सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
For more than a week now, we've been watching these heart-rending pictures coming out of Turkey and Syria, more Turkey and Syria, because the impact of the earthquake which has been caused, this is one of the most earthquake-prone zones in the world, as often happens, caused by the Anatolian fault. This has been felt a lot more in Turkey. It's also true that that much news is not coming out of Syria because of Syria's own problems, Syria's governance problems, internal strife, etc., especially in the region of Idlib. But devastation is more in Turkey. Also, a lot more people have died in Turkey. As we are speaking, I would say on conservative estimates, more than 50,000 people have died. About 2/3 of those are in Turkey. Now, Turkey is not your quintessential disaster state. Disaster state in the sense that it is prone to having many natural disasters, earthquakes, sometimes forest fires, sometimes other kinds of disasters, even snowstorms. To that extent, it is disaster prone, but it's not a typical disaster country in the sense that this is not a very poor or a poor, even poor by any definition, and crowded country, because those are countries and cities where you might have, if a disaster strikes them, natural disaster strikes them, you might see a lot of damage. Turkey is actually quite a rich country. Turkey has a per capita income, nominal, not PPP, nominal per capita income of nearly $11,000. That is 5 times, at least 5 times as much as India's per capita GDP. Turkey's total GDP is almost $1 trillion on a population of just over 8.5 crores. At 8.5 crores, it's among the biggest countries in the Middle East. Egypt is 10 crores, Turkey is 8.5 crores, then you have Iran, Iraq, etc., etc., etc. It's a very large country. It's also very much a country inhabited by one dominant race. It has Kurds who are about 19%, for whom there is always a problem with Turkish regimes. But Turkey itself is almost fully Sunni Islamic and a very powerful country, a rich country which is a member of NATO. Now, again, a peculiar country because only 3% of Turkey falls in Europe. But Turkey is an Asian country with a European pretense, right? And Turkey has done this quite successfully, not just under Erdogan for the last 20 years, but even before that. What is the reason Turkey looks so badly hit by this earthquake? First of all, nobody can stop an earthquake. Nobody can predict an earthquake. Anybody who says that I can predict an earthquake is a follower of one of those babas and charlatans who grab islands and declare their own kingdoms, etc., etc. Nobody can predict an earthquake, not yet. Also, when an earthquake hits you, there is very little you can do. If our house catches fire, you can run away. If a flood comes, you can escape. An earthquake gives you no warning. So, what is the only protection against earthquake? The only protection against earthquake is to be conscious all the time if you're in a quake-prone zone, particularly as this part of Turkey is, because these are regions along the Anatolia fault. Then you have to be conscious and you have to then build this into your construction system, into the way you build your buildings, houses, infrastructure, highways, even your runways. That is something that, say, a country like Japan has done so beautifully. Japan gets much stronger earthquakes. If this was 7.8, 7.9, Japan's last one was 9.1. You know how earthquake calculation goes up? With every point to the decimal, it does not go up by just that much. It goes up by a multiple. That is too complex for me to explain, but it just becomes 8.4 is enormously stronger than 8.3. It is not just 0.1 point stronger, right? That calculation, maybe some other expert, somebody from our science bureau will figure out for you. But Turkey has these big losses and you've seen these buildings reduced to rubble. At this count, nearly of the 170,000 buildings surveyed in the earthquake, the most earthquake hit area of Turkey, nearly 30,000, almost 30,000, that is almost 17 to 18 out of 100, they are reduced to rubble or they are severely damaged, unfit for habitation. They may fall anytime, maybe next time there is an aftershock, they may fall, which means these buildings are a write-off. So nearly 30,000 big buildings, sizable buildings out of 170,000, that's nearly 1/5 in a very rich country, and most of these are not old buildings. In fact, you will find that in many of these cases, ancient buildings survive. Most of these are newer buildings. In fact, most of these buildings have been built in the last 20 years, which is Erdogan years, which is the nub of what we are talking about. That is corruption and earthquakes, because I will also quote to you a couple of studies that show that corruption causes more deaths in earthquakes. Now, if you look at all that, then you wonder less as to why Turkey, a rich country, rich developed country, very high ratings on Human Development Index, very high Human Development Index ratings of 0.838 or something, which is very high. Ranking is 48 in the world, again very, very high, just under the top countries of Europe, etc. In spite of that, this country suffered such severe damage. And now there is a widespread belief, and a lot of data is coming out that tells us that much of this is because of corruption in the Erdogan era. Now, many things have happened in the Erdogan era with corruption. You might say that, look, all said and done, this may be however flawed it is a democracy. So opposition will always blame the ruling party, even for an earthquake, right? Nobody can create an earthquake. Nobody can prevent an earthquake. So earthquake aa gaya, act of God, main kya karu? But it's not just that. Did your country follow your rich country? At least 5 times as rich as India on a per capita basis, and incredibly good human development indicators, European style, Western European style human development indicators in many areas, right? If a country like that also suffers this kind of damage, this kind of deaths, and also this kind of destruction, that tells you something has gone wrong. And now I'm reading a lot of experts, a lot of global media, and that is telling us that much of it is a consequence of the corruption, cronyism, etc. that has taken place under Erdogan. And Erdogan is now under pressure. He's now under pressure, and it's showing in his responses. And as strongmen of the nationalist right always do, he's also using counter-attack as a form of defense. So he's calling all those who criticize him either for corruption that led up to bad construction or shoddy relief work. His relief teams did not appear for 48 hours after the earthquake. They were shell-shocked, and I will tell you something else that happened with them in just a minute. And you will understand why and why people are angry. So they are criticizing him. He has called them dishonorable. He's called them dishonorable. He's trying to rally his base into saying that, see, just at a time of national disaster over which I had no control, these guys are attacking me. They are trying to take political advantage of it. This is an old playbook of the strongman ruler of the nationalist right. We know that. Whether that will work or not, we don't know. But the fact is that there was another earthquake, not as severe as this, but quite severe, which cost about 18 to 19,000 lives in Turkey. That was 1999. It was the supposed shoddy response to that earthquake that led to the defeat of the incumbent then, and Erdogan won a majority on the promise of removing corruption, etc., and saying that all these earthquake deaths a lot of these would have been prevented if there was less corruption in our building system, our construction system, our infrastructure system, etc. So he had come into power on the promise of removing that corruption. On the other hand, what has happened, from whatever I read, looks like exactly the opposite has happened. So there's an article which I'm sharing with you from context.news. That's a Thomson Reuters platform. And this is an article by John Hemming. And he says that, look, while more than 100 have been arrested, a lot of the people, Erdogan's critics, are now saying that this is all the fault of Erdogan and the kind of cronyism has built, because he's then not enforced any building laws, because this is a severe earthquake prone zone. And it's not as if you cannot build mostly safe structures in severe earthquake prone zones. See how the Japanese do it, right? But in his case, while Turkey could have done it, He has waived a lot of these regulations, obviously allegedly for consideration, and that is what has led to poor quality construction. So he quotes Feray Artekin, who's a left-wing columnist from a left-wing publication, Birgun, it's a newspaper, Birgun, and I quote directly from Feray Artekin, the columnist, quote, "The murderer is not the earthquake, but those who turn the cities into mass graves in the name of urban transformation. Those whose signatures are at the bottom of every building approval." Now, Environment Minister of Turkey, who's Murat Kurum, he himself had confirmed 4 days back, right? 4 days back, he had confirmed that nearly 25,000 buildings have been reduced to rubble. From that, I have now made a projection of at least 30,000, and I am being quite conservative. Now, Erdogan came to power in 2002, but between 2012 and 2022, that's been his glory era. That's when his power kept on rising and rising and rising, and he did funny things to his constitution, his election system, to his opposition, to civil society, etc., to make himself into a classical elected dictator, not that different from Putin at this point of time. Still different from Putin. Putin is much bigger, is a much bigger dictator, but he hasn't quite got there, but he's been getting there. So it was during this period that Turkey also saw a construction boom, big construction boom. So Turkey's big growth, Erdogan's big success was built around a construction boom. Skylines of his country's cities were changing. It is also the period when his country fell on the Transparency International's corruption index. In fact, it fell from 54th out of 174 to 101. His popularity, however, kept on rising because Turks thought their country was really growing, and the pillar of that perceived success in Turkey was construction, and that's how Erdogan and his AKP party continued ruling. But the fact is that this unraveled much too quickly. Now with the earthquake, because this earthquake has shown everything or many things that have gone wrong under a near or quasi-dictatorial regime. So there is a quote again from an opposition leader, that is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who says, and I quote, "The collapse is the result of systemic rentier politics." So what is rentier politics? In 2007, new rules were enforced by Erdogan's administration demanding or enforcing quake-proof construction in quake-prone areas. Good idea. 2018, these rules were further enforced. That is all right, you followed the 2007 rules, but now if you construct, you have to build even more columns and beams to make your houses or your buildings or your apartment complexes or your commercial complexes even safer in earthquakes. Right? The same year, however, the government did something else. Makes you wonder if these rules were being modified or strengthened all the time to make living in Turkey's quake-prone zones safer, or was it being done to seek more rent? So 2018, strict rules were enforced, brought in 2007. In 2018, these rules were made even stricter. The same year, think about it, the same year, Turkish government announced an amnesty. Which means if meanwhile all these years you haven't followed these rules, doesn't matter. Even if you haven't followed the rules of 2007, it doesn't matter. You can just pay us a fee and you'll be okay. Now, you could pay a fee and get an amnesty, and maybe with the fee also pay something under the table to somebody. I'm sure it worked like that. That's how rent-seeking governance works. I'm sure it worked like that, and nobody in the world now believes that that is not the case. You might have got that immunity for money by paying it over the table or under the table, or most likely both over the table and under the table. But you know what? You might have got the immunity, but nobody told God who controls earthquakes, right? Because God doesn't care who gives you immunity. Only God can give you immunity. And also nobody told the East Anatolian Fault. And why should East Anatolian Fault care? Because you are not going to drop money into that fault, and the fault has geology, the earth has no use for money. So this idea of having strong rules, fantastic. I have the world's best rules for construction in a quake-prone zone. But if you don't follow the rules, you can pay money. You can pay money to my government. So in the first amnesty, Turkish government actually earned $3 billion as amnesty fees. And if that was the official fee, you can imagine what the cutbacks or what the under the table payments might have been. So as a result, these really bad constructions carried on. For this first amnesty, how many people applied? Think about it. 10 million people. That is 1 crore people. It's a population of 8.5 crores in Turkey. 10 million people applied. 3 billion, I told you, $3 billion was the revenue. As a result, more than a half of the 13 million buildings in Turkey today are believed to be in contravention of these earthquake regulations. Amnesties were very, very popular. People were very happy. You see, routinely in India also we have amnesties. Their bijli ka bill maaf, your electricity bill is written off, or your penalties for your house tax, property tax are written off, as was done in Delhi. Power bills are now routinely waived off by states, but those are bad write-offs. All write-offs are bad, but write-offs on safety, that you have violated safety regulations, construction regulations, and then you can pay money and carry on as usual. That doesn't work like that. In fact, these amnesties were so popular and so lucrative, officially and unofficially, for the exchequer as well as for the ruling party and the politicians and the bureaucrats. They are so popular that Erdoğan administration had planned yet another amnesty. That amnesty had already been finalized, announced. This was right now going through the parliamentary processes for passing. That is when the earthquake hit, because gods also, at some point, they get fed up. They see you doing this stuff over and over and over and over again, and ultimately, gods, no matter what you believe, who you believe in, whatever that big power is, divine power is, does not like arrogance. So arrogance does ultimately get punished. Unfortunately, tens of thousands of innocent Turks in this case are paying the price for it. There's also a growing sense right now among well-informed people that this could also break Erdogan's momentum, because already his economy has not been doing well. I told you he's got very good per capita income. He's got a very prosperous population. But the fact is that today his inflation rate has moderated. Mark my words. It has moderated substantially. Mark my words. Moderated substantially to how much? To 57.5% on an annualized basis. 57.5%. Our inflation goes above 6%, stays above 6%. We get so hassled. Our Reserve Bank gets so overactive, so proactive, raising interest rates all the time because they want to kill that inflation. They have to keep that between the 4 to 6% band. In Turkey, in Erdogan's Turkey, an inflation across 2022 averaged across the year more than 75%, peaking to 85+% in the month of October. In fact, for all of 2022, it stayed above 75% every month on an annualized basis. But for 5 months, July, August, September, October, November, it stayed above 80%. It peaked at 85%. So when I say 57%, it has indeed moderated to 57%, but that's because it had gone to 85%. Can you imagine 85% annualized inflation? And in the middle of all this, Erdogan has been running the government his own way because he thinks he's so powerful, monetary policy doesn't matter to him. So as his inflation goes up, he actually forces his central bank governor to cut the inflation rate. Anywhere in the world, when inflation goes up, central banks raise interest rates. He cuts interest rates, right? He cuts interest rates. His currency weakens even more. In 2017, the lira, Turkish lira, was about 3.4 to $1 on an average. Today, it is 18.7, 18.8 to $1. So in 5 years, lira has lost so much value. 2017, 5 years back, 340 lira would have bought you $100, right? Today, 1870 lira will buy you $100. So dollar has strengthened 6 times, or lira has weakened 6 times, or to 1/6 of its value in 5 years under Erdogan. And if you see the chart, if you see the data, I will give you the data. It's quite telling because this has been a consistent decline. And while his economy has declined, his inflation has gone up, his monetary system has gone for a 6. He has been keeping his own popularity alive by Islamizing more, by talking more of religion, by raising more of sectarian issues. We wrote an editorial, a 50-word editorial on Turkey when India decided to send aid there. And a lot of people found it insensitive because we said that this also should school Turkey on some of the things that Erdogan has been doing, also vis-a-vis India. I agree the timing of that editorial could have been a bit different. Maybe it was written too early in this cycle, or maybe one or two words might have sounded insensitive. The fact, however, is that this has been Erdogan's central politics. His central politics, key to his populism, is to try and become the leader of the Islamic world. And that's the reason he's been speaking out at the UN General Assembly on Kashmir, etc., fully in Pakistan's favor. So that is the way he keeps his popularity alive. Otherwise, see what's happening to his country. If you just look at what's happened to his currency over 5 years, I told you, 2017, I told you, average value of lira 3.4 to a dollar. 2018, 5.7 to a dollar. Then 2019 again goes up. 2020, 7.01, say 7 to a dollar. So every year, lira's value, in fact, I should make the graph like this. Lira's value to the dollar is coming down. It looks counterintuitive because you might say, oh, if it becomes 3.4 to 7 in 2 years. So lira lost half its value over 2 years between 2017 and 2019. So if you plot the value of the lira against the dollar, it has fallen almost vertically year on year. So 3.4 in 2017 average, 5.7 average in 2018, 2019. 2020 it comes to 7. 2021 comes to almost 9, 8.89, that's 8.9, which is about 9. Although the lowest value that year was 16.66, but average was 8.89. 2022, the average was 16.57, right? See how rapidly it's declining year on year. The worst was 18.71, and as we speak, I just checked before I started recording, it's 18.86. So that is how bad the economy is in Turkey. But Erdogan keeps riding his own kind of populism. That momentum is now going to be challenged big time. I also shared with you an article from Foreign Policy. It's a very detailed and very touching article in Foreign Policy by Gonul Tol. Gonul Tol is the founder director of Middle East Institute's Turkey program and author of a famous book, Erdogan's War, A Strong Man's Struggle at Home and in Syria. She writes about what Erdogan has done in all these years. She says that, look, he came into power on the promise of removing corruption, easing up this, easing up that, but what has he done instead? Number one, he's centralized power in his own hands. 2, he's hollowed out state institutions. 3, he has played loyalists in key positions. 4, he's wiped out most civil society organizations. 5, he's enriched cronies to create a small circle of loyalists around himself, and the culmination of all these things paved the way for the tragedy that has struck my country. And then she reminds us that research shows that quakes kill more in corrupt countries. And I told you earlier that I will share some of this research with you, and these will be links with the description of today's Cut the Clutter. So there is, from a journal called Hayes, there is an article, The Globalist Notebook by Jake Amtruda, which compares the outcome of the earthquakes in Japan, Haiti, New Zealand and China. It's a 2011 article. The big earthquake in Japan, 8.9, I told you on Richter scale. Japan, Haiti, New Zealand and China. And that research shows that in corrupt systems, say Haiti for example, in the more corrupt systems, a lot more people die because there are always nexuses of contractors and the establishment. And these contractors become very rich. They make the establishment very rich as well. And these two work together. So this is the most dangerous cronyism of all, particularly when an earthquake strikes. So look at one specific Turkish example. The premier Turkish disaster management agency like our NDMA, for example, or NDRF in India. That is Turkish Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency, known by the acronym AFAD, AFAD. AFAD's own headquarters, it has a massive headquarters in Hatay, which has suffered the most damage. So because you know this is a big earthquake prone region, so AFAD had a big headquarters, a big center in Hatay. That building itself has been completely reduced to rubble. Even that building did not follow standards built to withstand earthquakes of this intensity. The runway on Hatay was again built by a crony on a pre-existing fault. On a pre-existing fault in the earth. That runway has cracked into 2 now. Because as we told you earlier, gods, any gods, and particularly gods, that control our fate when earthquakes strike. They don't care about what your power is and how much money you have. If you build a runway on top of a fault, the runway will crack, which is what happened in this case. And again, Turkey, for a much richer country than say India, I told you 5 times richer on per capita basis, even a country that's quite rich has very poor response to its disasters. There was a disaster in a mine in the town of Soma on the Aegean. 787 miners died. And remember, that came 20 days after, just 20 days after Erdogan had snuffed out a demand, in fact, pressure in his parliament to order an inquiry into safety standards in that particular mine. 787 people died. People have died in forest fires. After that, the government admitted that they had invested nothing in firefighting aircraft, although Turkey is so prone to forest fires. In fact, if you read this article, it tells us that AFAD's budget is much smaller. AFAD's budget, the National Disaster Relief Organization's budget, is much smaller than a ministry called Presidency of Religious Affairs, which mainly exists to give religious legitimacy to state policies. The man in charge of emergency response at AFAD is a theology graduate with zero experience in any emergency relief operations. So again, I told you about Turkey's falling rankings on Transparency International's rankings, global rankings. So Transparency International's Turkey head for Turkey, that's Oya Ozarslan. She has been quoted as saying that Turkey's ranking has fallen because of an environment enabling corruption and not punishing the guilty. Now you might say, oh, you're talking about Turkey. What about India? So India is not doing that well. Maybe marginally less worse than Turkey. So Turkey is 38 out of 100. India is just a little bit above 40 out of 100, still below the global average, and about 15 rankings above Turkey. So not great. But remember, India is a much poorer country and much more crowded country than Turkey. And again, if you want more evidence that corruption kills, there is also a 2008 paper that I'll share with you. Headline: Corruption and Earthquake Destruction, Observations on Events in Turkey, Italy and China. So please check this out also. What's happened in Turkey and Syria is a great tragedy. So in Syria, the tragedy is compounded because the governance of the country's own cohesion is completely shot. Syria is a failed, broken state. But Turkey is not a failed, broken state. Turkey is a first-rate country, first-rate state with first-rate people who do well all across the world. In fact, Turkish construction companies are famous all over the world. They're doing a lot of construction in India, a lot of the tunneling for our metros, for example, the Atal tunnel in Kashmir between Jammu and Srinagar, very crucial for India. Many other tunnels in the country, highways, pipelines are being built by Turkish infrastructure companies in partnership with Indian companies. So Turkey is not a basket case country. It's just that Turkey probably has had a government that's become more and more dictatorial by the year in the past 20 years. And dictatorship also breeds a lot of corruption because dictators collect cronies around themselves. And very unfortunately, it's the people of Turkey who are paying the price of it. Maybe if this sequence of amnesties, etc. had not taken place and a climate of impunity had not come in, maybe some tens of thousands of lives would have been saved.